Welcome to the Phil and H Travel Podcast. Is it worth it? If you're planning a trip and want the honest is it worth it verdict before you book, follow the show on Spotify or Apple.
Glad to be here.
So, I want you to imagine this. You just stepped off a plane onto this sun-drenched Caribbean tarmac, right?
Best feeling.
Yeah, exactly. The trade winds are blowing, the palm trees are swaying, and you have that immediate visceral feeling of finally being on vacation.
You can practically smell the salt water.
Right. So you grab your rental car and you head to the local supermarket to stock up the villa. And you just grab a standard, everyday bag of ground coffee, like the exact same brand you might see on a shelf in mainland France.
Sure, just grabbing the basics.
You take it to the register, and it rings up at almost $9 US.
Ouch. Yeah.
I mean, that is over double the price you'd pay back in Europe. You pause, you do the mental currency conversion again, and you realize that your postcard fantasy just collided head first with a very complex geopolitical reality. Welcome to the deep dive.
It really is the ultimate wake-up call for travelers, and honestly, it happens every single day.
Today, we're taking a massive stack of data, travel reports, socioeconomic audits, and, just real on-the-ground logistical realities. And we are aiming our lens squarely at Martinique.
Which is this staggeringly beautiful, incredibly unique French department. It's sitting right there in the Eastern Caribbean.
Yeah. And our mission today for this deep dive is to cut through those glossy travel brochure fantasies. We are auditing the true logistics, the hidden costs, and the absolute reality of traveling to Martinique in the 2026 and 2027 seasons.
Because there's a lot going on behind the scenes there.
Exactly. So whether you're planning a sprawling family getaway, maybe mapping out a solo backpacking adventure, or you're just endlessly fascinated by how global supply chains and inflation dictate the modern tourist experience, this deep dive is going to give you the honest verdict. We want you to know exactly if this island is worth your time, your money, and frankly, your hard-earned vacation days.
And we really have to tackle that $9 bag of coffee right out of the gate, because it represents what we really need to call the Martinique paradox.
The Martinique paradox, I like that.
So if you hold a U.S. or European passport, your entry to this island is completely seamless. You walk out of the terminal into this high-tier EU-grade infrastructure. But that exact same infrastructure brings a really punishing euro price in the tropics reality.
Right. It's like the reliability and the financial frustration are driven by the exact same engine. You just cannot separate them. But to understand how this impacts you, the traveler who is just trying to set a daily budget, we have to look at the structural mechanics of the island, specifically the 2024 cost of living crisis.
Yeah, that was a huge deal.
This wasn't just, a minor complaint about expensive milk. This was a massive socioeconomic event.
It was a total breaking point. For 6 weeks in late 2024, Martinique saw these intense island-wide protests over supermarket prices. Yeah, we are talking about roadblocks, massive demonstrations, and basically a complete paralysis of the local economy. And looking at the data neutrally, the pressure from those protests forced the government and the major distributors to implement a mandated 20% price cut on roughly 6,000 imported daily goods.
Which, that sounds like a victory, right? A 20% haircut on 6,000 items seems like it would fix the problem for locals and tourists alike.
You'd think so.
But when you dig into our research, the root causes, like the actual structural physics of how a bag of flour or a piece of cheese physically gets to Martinique, haven't changed at all. 80% of the food consumed on this tropical island is imported.
80%. That is the immovable object in this equation. You have an island that's thousands of miles from the European mainland, yet its consumption habits and regulatory standards are entirely French. So an item is manufactured in Europe, it's loaded onto a shipping container, transported all the way across the Atlantic Ocean, unloaded at the port in Fort-de-France, and then, and this is the kicker, it gets hit by something called the octroi de mer.
Yes. I was so fascinated by this when I was reading through our sources. The octroi de mer. It translates roughly to the sea toll or sea octroi.
Exactly.
And this isn't some modern bureaucratic invention to fund highways or something. This is a centuries-old import levy. It dates all the way back to the 1600s during the colonial era. It was originally designed to protect local sugarcane and rum production from outside competition by taxing anything that arrived by ship.
Right, and while that colonial economy has completely vanished, the tax remains. Today, it functions as a primary source of revenue for local municipalities. But here is the mechanical problem for your wallet. It sits at the base of the pricing structure.
Okay, walk me through that.
So when an importer brings in goods, they pay the octroi de mer plus standard shipping costs. Then they sell it to a wholesaler who obviously marks it up. Then it goes to a distributor who marks it up again. Then it finally hits the supermarket shelf. So the tax effectively compounds at every single stage of the supply chain.
So if you're a tourist arriving in 2026, you are essentially expecting this breezy, cheap Caribbean getaway, but you've accidentally walked into a Parisian boutique that had to charter a cargo ship just to stock its shelves.
That's a great way to put it.
You're paying the European retail baseline, plus the brutal cost of transatlantic ocean freight, plus a localized historical tax, plus the middleman markup.
Which establishes a very rigid economic floor for your trip. The structural economics entirely dictate the tourist experience. Let's actually look at the baseline data we pulled from recent traveler audits.
Yeah, let's get into the numbers. Getting there first.
Right. Getting there from the U.S. East Coast usually means routing through Miami on American Airlines. Or if you're coming from Europe, you're flying out of Paris on Air France or Corsair. Those round-trip flights generally sit in the $500 to $850 range.
Though, I mean, if you are obsessive about tracking promo cycles, you can occasionally snag fares closer to the $200 mark.
True. But once you land, you cannot hack your way out of that supply chain math we just talked about.
No escaping the grocery store.
Exactly. The data tells us that a budget traveler, stripping away all luxuries, is going to spend about $101 a day. A mid-range traveler averages $233 a day. And the luxury tier sits at roughly $456 a day.
And we will definitely break down exactly what those daily budgets buy you a little later on. But knowing that this financial floor exists forces us to look at the calendar, right? If you are going to spend that kind of money, the timing of your trip dictates the actual value you extract from those dollars.
Because timing in Martinique isn't just about, whether it's sunny or cloudy. The seasonal dynamics here completely alter the geography of what you can and cannot do on the island.
So let's map out the ideal scenario first, like the absolute premium window.
The premium window is the dry season, which the locals call the Karam. This runs from December through April. If you want the classic postcard experience, this is when you go.
Makes sense.
The humidity drops significantly, the trade winds are remarkably steady, and the Caribbean coast on the leeward side of the island is just glassy and calm. February and March are really the absolute sweet spots for reliable, brilliant weather.
But of course, the travel industry knows this. So this is also the premium pricing window.
Oh, absolutely.
Mid-range hotel rates around popular hubs like Pointe du Bout will just surge. A room that might sit at $94 in October suddenly rockets to between $140 and $180 a night.
And if you try to book during the French school holidays in February, you are paying absolute top dollar and competing with half of Paris for a lounge chair.
Which naturally leads us to the contrarian approach, right? Traveling in the off-season to save money. But in Martinique, the off-season comes with some pretty severe mechanical risks.
Very severe. Let's look at the August to October window. This is the peak of the Atlantic hurricane season.
Right. And even if you aren't staring down the barrel of a Category 4 direct hit, the baseline weather pattern just shifts. You get heavier tropical rain, way higher humidity, and the risk of these severe weather bands that can completely wash out 4 or 5 days of a 7-day trip. It's a gamble.
It's a huge gamble. But honestly, the rain is actually the lesser of two evils when we look at the late spring and summer months.
Yeah, let's talk about the big one.
The dominant factor that ruins Martinique vacations is the Sargassum seaweed influx.
This is wild, and we really need to explain the mechanics of what this actually is, because I think a lot of people just hear seaweed and think, oh, I'll just step over some kelp on my way into the water.
Yeah, that is absolutely not what is happening here.
Not at all.
Sargassum is this brown macroalgae that forms in massive island-sized blooms out in the Atlantic Ocean. Driven by warming ocean temperatures and nutrient runoff from major river basins in South America, these blooms just get caught in the ocean currents and they drift directly into the eastern Caribbean island chain.
And Martinique's eastern coast, the Atlantic windward, side acts like a giant catcher's mitt for this stuff.
That's exactly what it is.
We are talking about tons of biomass washing ashore. It completely chokes the famous southern beaches. Spots like Les Salines, Sainte-Anne, and Le Marin get absolutely hammered from spring into the summer.
And to address your point earlier about just stepping over it, When this sheer volume of organic matter piles up 3 feet high on the sand and bakes in the tropical sun, it begins to decompose.
Ah,
Yeah, and as it rots, it releases hydrogen sulfide gas.
which smells exactly like rotten eggs or sulfur. It is pungent.
Mm.
Our sources were saying it tarnishes silver jewelry, it can cause respiratory irritation, and it just makes sitting on what is supposed to be a pristine beach physically intolerable.
Exactly. The Sargassum effectively deletes the eastern and southern beaches from your itinerary during a heavy bloom. However, knowing the geography provides the solution.
Because there's a workaround.
Right. Because the trade winds blow from the east, the sheltered west coast of Martinique, the Caribbean side, is generally protected. Beaches like Anse-Métain, Anse-du-Four, and Anse-Noire stay significantly clearer.
So if you are traveling between May and October, you have to operate with a backup plan. But nature isn't the only thing that creates unpredictable bottlenecks on this island. The crowd dynamics are super fascinating because they are highly situational.
Yes.
It's not just a blanket of tourists everywhere all the time.
The human traffic is very concentrated. The prime example is the cruise ship industry. Ships dock at the Point Simon terminal right in the capital city of Fort-de-France.
Right in the middle of everything.
Exactly. On a Tuesday in January, you might have 2 or 3 megaships in port simultaneously. Between the hours of 9 in the morning and 3 in the afternoon, the city center transforms. The Grand Marché, which is the covered spice market, and the Savane Park become shoulder to shoulder with thousands of day trippers.
I mean, the infrastructure of the city just cannot absorb that many pedestrians at once without feeling totally overwhelmed.
Mm-hmm.
But the solution to this is wonderfully simple, right?
Mm-hmm.
Cause and effect.
Mm-hmm.
If the ships are in Fort-de-France, you just need to not be in Fort-de-France.
It's that easy. You check the port schedule online. When the ships are docked, you take your rental car and you drive north up the Route de la Trace into the rainforest, or you go explore the ruins of Saint-Pierre. You utilize the rest of the island while the epicenter is flooded.
Makes total sense.
And the same logic applies to the locals, actually. The stunning southern beach, Grande Anse des Salines, is the default weekend getaway for residents of the capital. If you go on a Saturday, parking is an absolute nightmare and the sand is packed. If you go on a Wednesday morning, it is tranquil and pristine.
So really, Martinique demands a traveler who is hyper-aware of their surroundings. You have to ask yourself right now, like, are you the type of person who can pivot effortlessly if you wake up, check a Sargassum webcam, see that your planned beach is covered in rotting algae, and smoothly redirect your family to a western cove?
Right.
Or will that friction ruin your mood for the entire day? Because if you demand perfectly static, predictable perfection, the seasonal realities here are going to frustrate you deeply.
It is an island that strictly rewards flexibility and proactive planning.
Speaking of proactive planning, let's talk about what happens the moment you actually arrive. You've booked the flight, you've accepted the paradox, and your plane touches down at Martinique-Aimé-Césaire International Airport in L'Île-aux-Montagnes.
The arrival experience immediately reinforces that paradox we discussed. You are geographically in the Caribbean, but you are administratively in Europe. The airport is a highly modern, efficient EU standard facility. It's located about 15 minutes outside the capital and maybe 40 minutes north of the southern resort towns.
And the immigration process is just a dream. If you are holding a U.S. or European passport, there are no complex visa requirements, no ETIAS forms to fill out right now. You simply present your passport and your return ticket, get your stamp, and you are through.
It's so fast.
It totally lulls you into a sense of frictionless travel.
Well, until you walk out the sliding glass doors and hit the ground transport reality, this is the first major logistical wall travelers slam into.
It's a massive wall. Let's make this abundantly clear based on every piece of source material we have.
Yeah.
There is no train network. There is no comprehensive, tourist-friendly coach bus waiting to squeak you away to your resort.
Mm-hmm.
And most shockingly for modern travelers, there is zero Uber, Lyft, or equivalent rideshare operating in any meaningful capacity.
None. And the absence of ride-sharing isn't an accident. The French taxi unions are incredibly powerful and protective of their industry, both on the mainland and in the overseas departments. They have effectively locked out the gig economy ride apps to maintain their monopoly on airport transfers and tourist transport.
Which means, if you step out of the airport without a plan, you are entirely at the mercy of the official taxi rank. And because they hold the monopoly, the pricing absolutely reflects it.
Oh, yeah.
A simple 15-minute ride into Fort-de-France is going to cost you roughly $30 to $45.
Yeah.
If you are heading down to the popular southern hubs like Saint-Anne or Le Marin, you are looking at $60 to $90 one way in the middle of the day.
And that daytime qualifier is crucial, which we will dissect later when we talk about traps. Because of this transport vacuum, our data points to a singular, non-negotiable imperative for visiting Martinique. You must book a rental car.
Must?
Whether it's Europcar, Sixt, Hertz, Jumbo Car, or a local independent agency, you need to secure a vehicle. Base rates for a small economy car usually start around $30 to $50 a day.
Let me push back on that for a second, because I know there are listeners thinking, I hate driving in foreign countries. I want to relax. Isn't there any public transit? I saw mentions of something called the TCSP and Taxicos in the notes.
There is limited public transit, yes. The TCSP is a rapid bus system, and the Taxicos are shared collective minivans. They are very cheap, maybe a few euros a ride.
Okay, so why not use those?
Because you have to understand their purpose. They are designed for local commuters moving between the suburbs and the commercial center of Fort-de-France. They are not designed for tourists.
Got it.
They will not take you down the winding agricultural roads to a historic rum distillery, and they certainly won't drop you off at a secluded beach cove on the west coast.
So relying on public transit essentially confines you to a commercial commuter corridor. If you want to actually see the island, renting a car isn't just a recommendation, it is the skeleton key that unlocks Martinique.
Exactly.
But having that key introduces a new mechanical problem, right?
The traffic.
The topography of Martinique creates a severe infrastructure bottleneck. The economic and administrative heart of the island, the airport, the capital, the major commercial zones, is located centrally around Le Limontane and Ducos. However, the vast majority of the tourist accommodations and the best beaches are located in the south. It's like an hourglass. The entire northern half of the island and the central hub have to funnel through this one narrow pinch point to get to the southern half. And that pinch point is the A1 and N5 highway corridor.
That hourglass analogy is perfect. Every afternoon between 4:00 p.m. and 6:00 p.m., all the locals who work in the central hub get in their cars to drive home to the southern municipalities, right as the afternoon flights are landing and tourists are trying to reach their hotels.
So if your flight lands at 3:30 p.m., by the time you clear customs and get your rental car keys, you are driving straight into the neck of the hourglass.
You're stuck.
Which should be a breezy 40-minute drive down the coast of St. Anne, transforms into an hour-and-a-half bumper-to-bumper crawl. You're sitting in a brand-new European roundabout surrounded by palm trees, moving at 3 miles an hour.
Which is incredibly frustrating after a long flight. But to synthesize the arrival experience, the infrastructure itself is exceptional. Once you are out of the traffic, the roads are smoothly paved, the signage is clear and universally French, the cellular data is fast and reliable, and you are passing massive Carrefour and Hyper-U supermarkets that look like they were airdropped directly from Lyon.
But the golden rule remains. You absolutely must control your own mobility. Okay, so you've navigated the A1 bottleneck, you've got your rental car, you have your freedom. Where are you actually driving to unpack your bags?
That's the fun part.
The geography of the island heavily dictates your experience based on your specific traveler profile and budget. Let's break down the accommodation strategies.
Let's start with the backpacker, or the highly budget-conscious traveler. If you fall into this demographic, you want to focus your search on the southern tip municipalities like Sainte-Anne, Le Marin, or Saint-Luce. Or, alternatively, look inland for what the French call gîtes.
These are basically independent local guest houses or self-contained rural apartments, right?
Yeah. Exactly. They offer a much more authentic, stripped-down experience. For a backpacker bed or a basic gîte, you are targeting a price point of $41 to $70 a night. But the economic trade-off here is geography. At that price point, you are trading beachfront property for elevation or distance. You will likely be a 10 or 15-minute drive from the water.
Which, again, circles right back to why that rental car is so utterly essential. You cannot reach the beach from your $40 guest house without one.
Yeah.
Now, what about the mid-range traveler? Let's picture a couple on a comfortable but not extravagant budget.
The prime real estate for the mid-range couple is actually situated across the bay from the capital in a municipality known as l'Étiaas, specifically the resort areas of Pointe-du-Bout and Anse-Matin.
This is where you find a higher density of traditional tourism infrastructure, right? Places like the Hotel Bakua, older Kalinda-style resort properties, and a massive density of Airbnb apartments.
Right. You should budget roughly $94 to $160 a night in this zone. But the brilliance of choosing l'Étiaas isn't just the hotels. It is a very specific logistical hack.
The ferry.
Yes, the Cross Bay Ferry. There is a small, inexpensive commuter boat that runs back and forth across the water directly from Pointe du Bout into downtown Fort-France. It takes about 20 minutes.
So if you are a couple staying in Troilets and you want to go into the capital for a nice dinner or to explore the spice market, you don't have to get in your rental car, drive back up into the A1 hourglass bottleneck, fight for parking in a dense city, and drive back in the dark.
No, not at all.
You just walk to the marina, pay a few euros, and take a scenic boat ride across the bay.
Yeah.
That is a massive quality of life upgrade for a vacation.
It completely neutralizes the worst traffic on the island. Now, moving to the family demographic, the calculus changes entirely. For a family, traditional hotel rooms are a financial hazard.
Because of the food costs. We established earlier that the groceries are wildly expensive, so trying to feed a family of 4 at restaurants 3 times a day will incinerate your budget before Thursday.
Precisely. Therefore, self-catering is the absolute baseline requirement for families. You need to look for villas or apartment-style rentals with full kitchens in areas like Saint-Luce, Le Diamant, or Sainte-Anne.
And what's the cost on that?
Our data shows you can secure a very comfortable 2- or 3-bedroom property, often with a private pool, for between $150 and $300 a night.
But, and this is a flashing red warning light for anyone listening with kids, if you are booking a beautiful, non-refundable villa in the south or east, you must check the live Sargassum bulletins first.
Yes, absolutely critical.
We talked about how that rotting seaweed targets the south and east coasts. You do not want to lock in a massive rental payment, only to discover your kids can't even play in the backyard because the air smells like sulfur.
It is the most critical piece of due diligence for families. Finally, we have the luxury traveler. Interestingly, Martinique's luxury market is somewhat understated compared to islands like St. Lucia or St. Barth's. You won't find sprawling, hyper-dense mega resorts.
Which is a positive for a lot of people. It's more boutique.
Very much so. High-end properties tend to cluster either back in Les Croix-Ilettes or over on the Atlantic side in Le François. The Cap Est Lagoon Resort is a prime example over there. It utilizes a natural offshore lagoon that protects the beach from the rougher Atlantic surf and seaweed.
Oh, that's smart.
Right. You also find incredible historic boutique estate homes tucked inland in the hills. For this tier, you should plan on a minimum of $250 to $600+ a night.
Notice how, for almost every demographic except the very top tier, booking an apartment or a villa heavily implies that you are going to be cooking your own meals. Which brings us right back to the central nervous system of this deep dive, the grocery protests and the cost of food.
Because families and budget travelers are relying so heavily on self-catering to survive the economic floor, we need to forensically examine what food actually costs inside one of those massive hyper-U supermarkets. It is the hidden multiplier that ruins budgets.
Let's give the listeners some hard, undeniable data.
Yeah.
You walk through the automatic doors of a Carrefour in Le Lamentin. What is the actual damage at the register?
Let's fill a basic basket. A standard 1.5-liter bottle of drinking water will run you between $1.20 and $1.80.
Okay, that's completely reasonable.
A fresh, local baguette, straight from the bakery section, is about $1.30.
Again, very French, highly subsidized, no problem.
But the moment you pivot away from heavily localized or subsidized basics, the octroi de mer and the shipping costs assert themselves violently. A standard dozen eggs. You're paying roughly $4 to $5.50. A simple liter of milk is $1.60. A kilo of locally grown bananas is about $2.
But what if you want a taste of France? You're in a French department. You want some good imported cheese for your baguette.
If you want a wedge of imported French cheese, you are paying $8 to $14 for a relatively small, standard piece. And this brings us back to the coffee example from the intro because it perfectly encapsulates the mechanics of inflation here.
Let's break that down again because it really is the symbol of the 2024 unrest.
Take a standard 250-gram pack of branded vacuum-sealed ground coffee. If you walk into a supermarket in Lyon or Marseille on the mainland, that exact package costs about €3.50. In Martinique, before the price caps, that identical package routinely hit €7.80. That is over $8.40 USD.
It is a staggering markup just for the privilege of logistics.
Right.
And when you apply that 100% to 150% markup across an entire cart of groceries, cereal, butter, yogurt, pasta, chicken, you can completely understand the sociology of the protest.
Completely.
You have a local population, many of whom are not earning mainland European executive salaries, being forced to pay double the price for basic sustenance, while the supply chain middlemen extract the profit.
It creates immense friction. And for the tourist, it means your assumed food budget needs to be doubled. And what happens when you get tired of cooking at the villa and decide to eat out?
The costs shift again. If you just grab a casual lunch at a bakery or a beach shack, maybe a bucket sandwich or a small plate, you are spending $10 to $18 per person. If you sit down at a proper restaurant for a traditional Creole main course like fresh fish, you are at $18 to $30.
Plus drinks?
Right. A local beer, like a Lorraine, is $4 to $6. If a couple goes out for a nice dinner and shares a modest bottle of wine, you will easily clear $70 to $110 total.
But, and this is crucial, the quality of the gastronomy is exceptionally high. Despite the cost, there are culinary highlights that are non-negotiable for a visitor. Our sources universally rave about the food stalls inside the Grand Marché in Fort-de-France.
You have to seek out the local specialties there.
Yeah.
You cannot leave without eating acras, which are these incredibly light, perfectly fried cod fritters. Also the Colombo curry, which shows the historical Indian influence on the island's cuisine, and the boudin creole, a heavily spiced local blood sausage.
And we absolutely must discuss the rum agricole.
This is actually one of the very few things on the island that is a genuine, undeniable bargain.
It is, and we need to explain why, because it ties back to the agriculture. Most rum in the Caribbean is industrial rum, made from imported molasses, which is a byproduct of sugar refining. Martinique produces rum agricole, which is fermented and distilled directly from freshly pressed local sugarcane juice.
It's an entirely different product. It has an AOC designation, just like champagne or cognac in France, meaning it is strictly regulated for quality. It's grassy, complex, and incredibly refined.
And because it is produced locally, entirely bypassing the octroi de mer and the transatlantic shipping routes, you can buy a world-class, award-winning bottle of white rum in the supermarket for about $12.
It is the ultimate local life hack. Now, a quick vital note on dining etiquette, because social friction can ruin a meal faster than a high bill. You are in a French territory, and French social rules apply rigidly here.
Yes, the bonjour rule.
Bonjour rule. When you cross the threshold of a bakery, a small shop, or a restaurant, you absolutely must greet the staff with bonjour or bonsoir.
It's non-negotiable.
In American culture, we often just walk up to a counter and order. If you do that in Martinique, you are treating the staff like machines, and it is considered deeply aggressively rude. A simple greeting changes the entire dynamic of the service you will receive.
And regarding the end of the meal, what is the tipping structure? Because Americans tend to panic about this.
Oh, I know.
Tipping is not obligatory. Under French law, service is legally included in the menu price. Your $18 fish dish already pays the waiter's wage. You do not need to calculate 20% at the bottom of the receipt. If the service was truly exceptional, leaving a few extra euros in cash on the table is appreciated, but it is never required.
One final dietary note from the data. If you are a strict vegan or vegetarian, the traditional Creole dining scene is going to present a major challenge. The historical cuisine is intensely reliant on seafood, pork, and chicken. Navigating local menus without eating meat requires significant effort, which again reinforces the value of having your own kitchen in a rental property.
Absolutely. So we have audited the flights, the mandatory rental car, the geography of the hotels, the traffic bottlenecks, and the $8 coffee. It is time to synthesize this data. What does a day in Martinique actually cost in total?
This is where we build the master daily budget, translating all these disparate mechanics into real numbers based on traveler profiles. Let's start at the bottom and work our way up. The backpacker.
A disciplined backpacker needs to target $95 to $110 a day. Mechanically, that breaks down to about $41 for a hostel bed or a deeply rural gite. $30 to $40 for highly calculated, self-catered groceries, and maybe one cheap snack bar bucket. $20 to $30 to cover their daily share of an economy rental car and the fuel. And $10 to $20 for a modest activity, maybe paying for parking at a popular beach or a cheap museum entry.
Let's challenge that. What is the single biggest threat to that $95 baseline? Where does the backpacker fail?
The structural failure point for the budget traveler is the automobile. Specifically, the fuel. Because Martinique is an EU department, gasoline is priced at European standards, heavily taxed.
Okay.
Travelers arrive with a cheap Caribbean mindset, rent the car, drive all over the mountainous terrain, and are suddenly shocked when it costs $70 to fill up a small hatchback. If you drive extensively every day, your fuel costs will shatter that $110 ceiling.
Okay, next tier, the mid-range traveler. The couple in Choyelets.
You are looking at a hard average of $220 to $240 per person per day.
Which breaks down how?
Between $94 and $120 covers their share of a comfortable hotel or a nice Airbnb. $60 to $90 covers a hybrid food strategy, groceries for breakfast and lunch, and a nice sit-down restaurant dinner. $25 to $35 for their half of the rental car and the fuel. And $30 to $50 buys one solid paid activity per day, a guided rum distillery tour, or a sunset boat trip.
And now, the family. 2 adults, 2 kids. I saw this number in the notes, and it honestly made me wince.
It is a formidable number. Realistically, a family of 4 needs to budget $550 to $700 a day in total. That translates to $4,000 to $4,800 for a single week on the island.
That is immense. How does it scale so aggressively?
It scales because families require space. $180 to $300 immediately goes to a 2 or 3 bedroom villa. $120 to $180 vanishes into groceries at those inflated prices, plus occasional casual dining.
And the car.
$45 to $70 goes to a larger rental vehicle, an SUV or a wagon to fit the luggage, and the increased fuel it burns. And $60 to $120 covers group activities.
But there is a hidden mechanism here that families need to account for, right? The friction buffer.
Yes. Families absolutely must build a financial buffer into their daily budget for logistical failures. Imagine you wake up and your local beach is overwhelmed by sargassum. You now have to pack 4 people into a car, burn expensive fuel to drive an hour across the island to the west coast, and because you left your villa, you might have to buy a $60 lunch at a beach shack instead of eating the food you bought.
That pivot costs money, and it happens frequently.
That is incredibly insightful.
Yeah.
Okay, the luxury tier.
Luxury is operating at $450 to $650 or more per day. That's $300 to $500 for a premium boutique resort night, $120 to $200 for fine dining and expensive wines.
Plus the transport.
Right, $60 to $100 for a premium SUV rental or a private driver.
Yeah.
And perhaps a private catamaran charter, which can add $150 to $300 a day to the burn rate.
We also have data on a very specific modern demographic, the digital nomad. If you want to drop your laptop on a table in Martinique for a month, you are looking at $2,500 to $3,200 a month, which, when you compare it to places like Mexico or Colombia, is staggeringly steep.
It is fundamentally expensive for long-term stays. A modest, long-stay rental apartment will be $900 to $1,400. Groceries will consume $400 to $600 easily.
And they need a car, too.
Exactly. The true killer for the nomad is the lack of public transit. You cannot live effectively in Martinique for a month without a car, and leasing a vehicle for 30 days will drain $500 to $800 from your budget instantly. Plus, you need co-working spaces and mobile data.
So summarizing the financial reality, what are the absolute chronic mistakes people make? Where is the money bleeding out?
The data isolates 3 chronic underestimations: the cost of European-priced fuel, the absolute financial drain of attempting to eat at restaurants 3 times a day, and the airport taxi surcharges, which we will dissect momentarily.
And where is the genuine value?
The rum agricole is undeniably world-class and cheap. The local produce mangoes, bananas, fresh fish at the markets offers excellent value if you are willing to cook it yourself. And that cross-brasserie from Les Toiselles is a phenomenal cheap transport hack.
And the worst value.
Attempting to use taxis as a touring mechanism, it's financial suicide. And buying imported, branded European snacks at the supermarket. You do not need to pay $6 for a box of cookies shipped from Paris. Eat a local banana.
This brings us directly to a section I think is the most valuable part of this entire analysis. The source data identified 3 highly specific, incredibly common logistical traps that will fundamentally ruin your budget and your vacation if you aren't prepared for the mechanics of how they work. Let's walk through them.
Trap number 1 is what we call the no-car paralysis trap.
Break down the mechanism of this trap. How does a traveler fall into it?
The mechanism relies on a traveler's assumption that Martinique operates like Cancun or Punta Cana. They assume there will be a robust, cheap network of tourist shuttles, or that they can just pull out their phone and summon an Uber. As we establish, neither exists. So they arrive at their hotel without a rental car, planning to just use taxis to sightsee.
And what is the lived reality of that decision when they wake up on day 2?
The lived reality is absolute sticker shock. Say they want to leave their hotel in Choyelets, go down to the famous Les Salines beach in the morning, Then head north to see the volcanic ruins of Saint-Pierre in the afternoon and stop at a rum distillery on the way back.
A perfectly normal vacation day.
Yes, but hiring a taxi to execute that multi-stop cross-island itinerary will easily cost $150 to $250 for a single day.
Compare that to a $40 day rental car, plus maybe $15 in gas.
Exactly. The penalty of the trap is severe. You either hemorrhage hundreds of dollars to see the island or you succumb to the paralysis. You realize transport is too expensive, and you spend 6 days trapped at your hotel pool, completely missing the culture of the island. The fix is absolute. Book a rental car before you fly.
But there is a vital skip-if caveat here. You should skip Martinique entirely if you refuse to drive on winding, steep, sometimes aggressive mountain roads. If driving in a foreign country induces panic attacks for you, this is the wrong island. Go to a walkable, all-inclusive resort elsewhere.
A very fair assessment. Moving to trap number 2, the Sargassum roulette trap.
The mechanism here is entirely environmental.
It is. As we detailed, the Atlantic East Coast and the southern tip periodically receive massive, unpredictable rafts of Sargassum seaweed. The trap lies in the unpredictability. The blooms shift week to week based on prevailing winds and deep ocean currents.
So the lived reality is a family doing their research in January, seeing beautiful photos of a South Coast beach, and booking a non-refundable premium villa for July. They arrive, the wind has shifted, and they are situated squarely in the middle of a major influx. The beach is a rotting, brown, sulfurous mess.
The penalty is devastating. They have lost the core amenity they paid for, they are locked into peak rates, and their only recourse is to put the kids in the rental car every single day and drive 45 minutes to the western coast to find clear water.
How do you bypass this trap?
You must be proactive with data. There are local prevision services, government trackers, and community shore watch groups online that monitor the blooms in real time. You must check these before you commit money. Furthermore, if you are traveling during the spring or summer peak, you must favor flexible accommodations that allow last-minute cancellations. And you must always have western beaches like Anstafor mapped out as your failsafe.
And the skip-if is blunt. If your singular definition of a vacation is sitting on a perfectly clear white sand beach right outside your back door, skip a locked-in South Coast stay during the August to October window.
Which brings us to trap number 3, and this one is purely administrative and insidious, the night and Sunday taxi surcharge trap.
What is the mechanism behind this?
Because the official taxi unions operate a monopoly without rideshare competition, they can enforce strict tariff rules. In Martinique, official taxis apply a mandatory, legally backed surcharge of roughly 40% to any fare that occurs at night, on Sundays, or on public holidays.
40%. So the lived reality is that a traveler books a cheaper flight that lands at 8:30 p.m. on a Sunday. They think they saved money. They walk out to the taxi rank. That standard $60 daytime transfer down to their hotel in St. Anne suddenly rings up at $85 or $90.
And because they have luggage and it's dark, they're completely captive at the curb. They're forced to pay a premium just because of the clock.
You are losing $25 to $40 per trip instantly. So the fix.
Schedule daytime, weekday flight arrivals if you possibly can. But honestly, the ultimate fix for this trap is the same as the others. Have your own rental car waiting for you in the lot when you land.
That is the ultimate takeaway. I marvel at how all three of these major vacation-ruining logistical traps, the paralysis of movement, the seaweed evasion, the extortionate taxi surcharges, are all neutralized by one single action: thorough geographical planning and securing your own vehicle. It is the defensive shield for your budget.
It solves almost every structural friction point on the island. Okay, so you've navigated the traps, you are driving your rental car safely. What is the actual on-the-ground reality regarding safety, health, and comfort? This is a massive factor, particularly for families with young children or solo female travelers.
When we audit the safety data, Martinique stands out as a highly comfortable, secure destination, particularly by regional Caribbean standards. But we need to define the specific risk hierarchy.
Right. Let's start with violent crime against tourists.
It is extremely rare. Violent crime is simply not the primary concern for visitors here. The actual statistical risks are entirely related to petty property crimes, specifically opportunistic car break-ins.
And this happens where?
Mostly at remote hiking trailheads or isolated beach car parks. Tourists leave their vehicle for 4 hours to hike a volcano, and they leave a backpack visible on the back seat.
The fix for that is universal travel logic. Do not leave a single valuable item visible in the cabin of your rental car. Leave your passport locked in the hotel safe, take your phone and wallet in a dry bag to the beach, and leave the glove box open to show it's empty.
Exactly. Manage the opportunity and you manage the risk. Now, pivoting to health and comfort, this is where the island's status as a French department truly shines. The infrastructure benefits are massive. You have access to EU standard hospitals, highly trained medical staff, pharmacies stocked exactly like they are in Paris, and that drinkable tap water we mentioned earlier.
That water point cannot be overstated. Not having to buy bottled water to brush your teeth or not worrying about ice in your cocktail removes a huge layer of baseline travel anxiety.
And for emergencies, you simply dial 112, the European standard emergency number. This infrastructure makes Martinique incredibly reassuring for families who might suddenly require advanced pediatric care, or for solo female travelers who prioritize robust, reliable health and safety networks over raw, off-the-grid adventure.
But there are specific hazards to be aware of.
The primary physical hazard is the driving itself. The interior of the island is deeply mountainous. Roads like the Route de la Trèze, which cuts through the rainforest, are stunningly beautiful, but they are incredibly steep, narrow, winding, and often lack guardrails. You must drive defensively, and you absolutely want to avoid traversing those high mountain passes during heavy, torrential, tropical downpours.
And we also must neutrally highlight a social caveat for the 2026 and 2027 seasons. Because of the recent history with the cost of living protests and the unresolved structural issues regarding import reliance, there is always a latent possibility that civil tensions can flare up.
Right. This can manifest as sudden roadblocks, strikes at the port, or civic disruptions that halt traffic.
It is simply a practical necessity for any visitor to check local Martinique news outlets and social media both before they fly and while they're on the ground, just to maintain a baseline awareness of the social climate. You don't want to drive into a protest line on your way to the airport.
It's basic situational awareness. But synthesizing the data, any discomfort or danger in Martinique is almost entirely manageable and situational rather than a pervasive structural threat.
So let's assume you drive cautiously, you dodge the Sargassum, you lock your rental car, and the roads are clear. What are the actual rewards? What are the absolute highlights? And to be rigorously fair, what are the honest disappointments of the trip?
Let's start with the absolute wins, the moments that justify the airline ticket.
Looking at the data, the geography itself seems to be the biggest asset. Driving and hiking Mount Pelée is consistently rated at the top.
Mount Pelée is an active volcano that dominates the northern half of the island. The hiking trails up to the caldera are physically demanding but visually incredible. You ascend through different climate zones into the clouds, and sitting right at the base of that volcano is the town of Saint-Pierre.
Ah, the Pompeii of the Caribbean. The history here is staggering.
It truly is. Before 1902, Saint-Pierre was the cultural and economic capital of the island. It was known as the Paris of the Caribbean. Then, Mount Pelée erupted, sending a pyroclastic flow down the mountain that completely incinerated the entire city and killed nearly 30,000 people in a matter of minutes.
And today you can just walk through it.
Yes. The modern town is built amongst the blackened ruins. You can freely explore the remains of the old stone theater, the fractioned staircases, and the famous thick-walled prison cell where one of the only survivors, a man named Cyprus, managed to live through the heat. It is a deeply moving, atmospheric experience. It is entirely free to walk around, and it represents one of the most culturally profound half-days you can spend anywhere in the region.
Another massive win documented in our sources. The rum estates. We talked about the cheap bottles in the supermarket, but the actual distilleries are attractions in themselves.
The rum agricole estates are meticulously maintained. Habitation Clément, located over near Le François, is basically a massive, sprawling botanical garden and modern art gallery wrapped around a historic, preserved distillation facility. You can spend hours walking the grounds, looking at sculptures, learning the history of sugarcane, and doing a tasting, and the entry fee is only around $16 to $20.
And thesouth, which sits right on the slopes of Mount Pelée with views down to the Caribbean Sea, is another world-class, highly affordable tour. Speaking of botanical gardens, the Jardin de Balada is repeatedly cited as breathtaking.
It is a beautifully curated rainforest experience built into the hills along the Rue de la Trèze. You walk on suspended bridges through the canopy. It costs about $15 to $18 and is universally loved.
Okay, but what about the water? People go to the Caribbean for the ocean.
For water winds, you target the west coast coves. Anse-du-Four and Anse-Noire are two adjacent bays. Anse-du-Four has white sand, Anse-Noire has black volcanic sand. They offer free, calm water snorkeling directly off the beach. And crucially, they are famous for their resident sea turtle populations. You are highly likely to swim alongside turtles in crystal clear water, and it costs you absolutely nothing but the effort to park your car.
If you have a bit of budget to deploy, the data suggests booking a catamaran trip out to the Baignoire Josephine. This is a famous, incredibly shallow sandbank located out in the Atlantic off Le François, where the water is waist-deep, crystal clear, and naturally protected. You stand in the ocean drinking rum punch. Those day trips run about $80 to $130 per person and are highly rated. Okay, those are the undeniable wins. Now let's serve up some cold, hard reality. The honest disappointments that catch tourists off guard.
First on the disappointment list, Grande Anse de Saline.
Wait, really? But this is the beach? It is on every single postcard, every tourism board advertisement?
The physical geography of the beach is gorgeous. It is a classic crescent of sand lined with leaning palm trees. But the lived reality is different. First, it is heavily, sometimes oppressively crowded on weekends, as we discussed. Second, and more importantly, it is highly prone to the Sargassum seaweed. What Instagram and the travel brochures hide is that those iconic photos are taken very carefully on perfectly clear days in February, or they are heavily edited. If you show up on a Saturday in July expecting a secluded paradise, you are going to find 1,000 people, terrible traffic, and potentially a shoreline reeking of sulfurous algae. Expectations do not match reality in the summer.
Another common disappointment for traditional tourists, the black sand beaches in the north.
Because they aren't the classic Caribbean archetype.
Right. Beaches like Anse Coulouve are striking, dramatic, and wild, framed by jungle cliffs. But volcanic black sand gets incredibly blisteringly hot in the midday sun. The water offshore isn't that glowing, classic turquoise. It's a deeper, darker blue. They are beautiful, but they simply aren't everyone's idea of a relaxing, comfortable beach day.
And what about the capital city itself, Fort-de-France?
The capital is a busy, dense, working administrative hub. It has some architectural gems, like the Schulcher Library, which is this incredibly intricate iron and glass building that was actually built in France, displayed at the 1889 Paris Exposition, dismantled, shipped across the ocean, and rebuilt in Martinique.
That is cool.
It is. But beyond a few key sites, Fort-de-France is not a quaint, cobblestone, romantic European village. It has traffic, it has noise, it has industrial zones. If you go in expecting a quiet, romantic stroll through a pristine colonial town, you will be deeply underwhelmed.
So let me push back a little here and summarize what we just discussed. The absolute best parts of this famous Caribbean beach island are actually an active volcano, the blackened historical ruins of a destroyed city, and agricultural rum estates.
Yes, I completely stand by that assessment.
What that tells us is that Martinique richly rewards the active, engaged explorer. It rewards the traveler who gets in the rental car, navigates the winding roads, and hunts for culture, history, and geography. It does not reward the passive beach lounger who just wants to sit on a towel with a piña colada for 7 consecutive days.
That is the most crucial distinction we can make, which naturally leads us to ask, if a pure, frictionless, easy beach holiday is what you actually want, or if the daily financial budget we outlined is simply too tight, what are the viable alternatives? Because Martinique does not exist in a vacuum, there are neighboring islands right next door that offer fundamentally different experiences.
Let's do a direct comparison using our data. Let's pit Martinique against its 2 closest neighbors. Alternative 1 is Guadeloupe.
Guadeloupe is the natural sister island to Martinique. It is also a French overseas department.
So mechanically, you are dealing with the exact same baseline reality. They use the euro, they have the same EU infrastructure, the same visa-free entry, and the daily cost of living and groceries is remarkably similar, usually tracking within 10% of Martinique.
Exactly. So the choice between the two isn't about budget, it's about geography. You choose Guadeloupe for geographic variety.
Because of the butterfly shape.
Yes. Guadeloupe is essentially 2 main islands separated by a narrow river. One wing, Basse-Terre, is heavily mountainous, covered in dense rainforest, and features waterfalls that rival anywhere in the region. The other wing, Grande Terre, is much flatter, drier, and features those classic sweeping sandy beaches. Furthermore, Guadeloupe offers far superior island hopping. It is very easy to take short ferries to smaller, pristine islands like Les Saintes or Marie-Galante.
So where does Martinique win in a head-to-head matchup with Guadeloupe?
Martinique wins on compactness. Because it is a single smaller landmass, it is much easier to drive around and see multiple distinct zones in one day without exhausting yourself. Secondly, Martinique's rum heritage, the rum agricole infrastructure, is arguably deeper and more accessible. And historically, Martinique is considered to have a slightly more polished, elevated restaurant scene.
But the critical warning remains. Guadeloupe faces the exact same seasonal risks. The same hurricanes and the exact same Sargassum seaweed blooms hit their eastern shores. Now let's look at alternative 2, which is a massive departure. Dominica.
Dominica is situated directly between Martinique and Guadeloupe. You can actually reach it from Fort-de-France via a ferry service called l'Express de Elle. But it is a completely different world.
It is an independent nation, not a French department, and it is heavily positioned as the budget and nature alternative.
The daily costs in Dominica are routinely 20 to 30% lower across the board compared to Martinique. It is widely known as the Caribbean's premier nature island.
This is where you go for extreme, world-class hiking. The Boiling Lake Trail, Trafalgar Falls, incredible steep mountainous terrain, and phenomenal shore diving.
Yes, but the trade-off for that raw nature and lower price tag is the infrastructure. You have to sacrifice the EU standards. Dominica has very few classic sandy beaches. It is mostly rocky or volcanic coastlines. There are no sprawling mega resorts, the inland roads are incredibly rough and challenging, and the medical facilities are absolutely not at the European standard you find in Martinique.
So we can draw a very clear line. You choose Dominica if you want raw, challenging nature, extreme hiking, and a significantly cheaper daily burn rate. You skip Dominica entirely if you want easy logistics, comfortable resorts, fine French dining, and smooth highways.
Exactly. Martinique wins decisively on healthcare, culinary refinement, and paved infrastructure. Dominica wins on price point and untouched wilderness.
Synthesizing all of this, the $8 coffee, the seaweed traps, the volcano hikes, the ferry hacks, the alternatives, it is time to lay out the final, undeniable verdict on Martinique. We are going to run through our Is It Worth It matrix, delivering a clear score out of 10 and a definitive verdict based entirely on traveler demographics.
Let's do the final audit.
First up on the matrix, the backpacker.
For the pure backpacker, based on the financial data, we rate Martinique a 6 out of 10.
Why so low?
Because it is only worth it if you possess immense financial discipline. You must self-cater every single meal, you must secure the absolute cheapest economy rental car available, and you must travel strictly in the off-peak shoulder seasons to find those $41 rural guide beds.
Because, as we established, the absolute financial floor is $101 a day. If a backpacker arrives expecting to just hop on cheap local chicken buses and eat pad thai off a streetcar for $10 a day like they would in Southeast Asia, they will run out of money by Wednesday. Honestly, for the pure, budget-focused nature traveler, Dominica is simply a much better, less stressful call.
I completely agree. Next demographic. The mid-range couple.
The rating.
An 8 out of 10. This is actually Martinique's strongest, most compatible audience.
Explain the logic there. Why does the mid-range couple thrive here?
Because a couple operating with a mid-range budget, spending roughly $233 a day per person, can comfortably absorb the island's structural costs without feeling deprived. They can afford the essential rental car, they can afford a nice Airbnb in Trois-Îles with access to the ferry, and they can afford a few excellent French Creole dinners. It is highly worth it for them if they target the dry season, enjoy the mix of agricultural history and mountains, and intelligently keep a West Coast beach mapped out as a backup.
But the warning still applies. They should skip Martinique entirely if their only goal is a guaranteed, pristine beach, and they are locked into traveling during the summer Sargassum window.
Right. Third category on the matrix.
The family.
The rating for families is 7 out of 10. It is definitively worth it for a very specific reason. The safety, the clean tap water, and the EU standard pediatric health care. For parents traveling with young children, that infrastructure provides immense, priceless peace of mind. If, and this is a massive conditional if, they can comfortably afford the $4,000 to $4,800 a week it costs to run a family trip here, and if they rent a villa to strictly control their food costs.
But the family skip warning is brutal. I'll read this straight from the analysis. Skip it if you cannot absorb the logistical risk of a seaweed-hit beach in peak season. Because hauling frustrated children an hour across a mountainous island every single day just to find clear water is exhausting, and it defeats the purpose of a relaxing vacation.
It creates too much friction. Fourth category, the luxury traveler.
You rated this a 7 out of 10. I'm going to push back on this. At a burn rate of $650 a day, the fact that there are no massive Ritz-Carltons or Four Seasons properties seems like a negative for true luxury seekers. Why does it get a 7?
Because true luxury isn't always about massive resorts. It earns a 7 because it is highly worth it for a traveler who appreciates Understated boutique luxury. We are talking about beautifully restored historic inland estates where the owner makes you breakfast paired with exceptionally fine dining.
Okay, I see the angle. It's for people who actively dislike the mega resort compound experience.
Exactly. But they should skip Martinique if they do want that massive, dense, high-gloss mega resort scene found in St. Lucia or the Bahamas, because Martinique's high-end market is much more limited, subtle, and integrated into the local landscape.
Finally, the digital nomad or long-term solo traveler.
We give this demographic a 6 out of 10.
Breakdown.
It is worth it for the fast, highly reliable mobile data networks, the overall safety, and the European cafe culture that makes working remotely pleasant. But the burn rate is undeniably steep, at a minimum of $2,800 a month, largely because you are forced to lease a car just to function. It is a very expensive base for the region. Nomads should skip it if they require a low monthly overhead to sustain their travel.
So, synthesizing everything, the overall master verdict on Martinique is this. This is a breathtaking, complex island that deeply, strictly rewards careful booking and situational awareness. You cannot just blindly show up. You must rent a car to unlock the geography. You must self-cater to defend your wallet against those massive grocery markups. You must keep a West Coast beach mapped out as a logistical backup.
And you must absolutely avoid booking a non-refundable South Coast beach stay during that late summer window when the hurricanes and the Sargassum blooms peak.
It is a stunning, fascinating place. It simply requires you to do your homework.
Which brings up a much broader, incredibly important question that I think is really worth pondering as we wrap up this deep dive. Throughout this entire analysis, we've talked extensively about the 80% import reliance, the historical octroi de mer tax, and the intense social pressure of those 2024 supermarket protests.
The structural economics.
Yes. As global supply chains face increasing compounding pressure, whether from spiking fuel costs, from climate disruptions affecting shipping routes, or from geopolitical shifts, will highly developed but geographically isolated island economies like Martinique be forced to fundamentally change how they operate?
It is the big question.
Will they be forced, out of sheer necessity, to return to localized agriculture just to survive? Or, as the sheer cost of importing that European standard of living across an ocean continues to rise, will tourism simply become an increasingly exclusive, high-end luxury designed primarily to subsidize the basic local cost of living?
That is a phenomenal, somewhat chilling thought to end on. Are we currently looking at the twilight of the accessible mid-range island vacation if global supply chains keep tightening? It is a dynamic we all need to keep an eye on, not just for Martinique, but for the entire Caribbean basin.
It certainly changes how you look at the price of that $8 bag of coffee at the register, doesn't it?
It really does. It puts the entire postcard fantasy into a stark economic perspective.
If this gave you the honest verdict you needed, follow the show. New episodes drop every day. That is the honest verdict from Phil and H.